You are now listening to theGrio's Black Podcast Network, Black Culture Amplified.
Hi, and welcome to the Blackest Questions. I'm your host, Dr. Christina Greer, politics editor for theGrio and associate professor of political science at Fordham University. In this podcast, we ask our guests 5 of the Blackest questions so we can learn a little bit more about them and have some fun while we're doing it. We're also going to learn a lot about Black history, past and present. So here's how this works. We have 5 rounds of questions about us, Black history, the entire diaspora, current events, you name it. And with each round, the questions get a little tougher, and the guest has 10 seconds to get it right. If they answer the question correctly, they'll receive 1 symbolic black fist, and they'll hear this. And if they get it wrong, they'll hear this. But we still love them anyway. After the 5 questions, there'll be a black bonus round at the end just for fun. I like to call it Black Lightning. So, our guest for today's episode is Trymaine Lee, Pulitzer-Prize and Emmy Award-winning journalist. Trymaine Lee is a correspondent for MSNBC and host of the podcast Into America. He covers social justice issues and the role of race, violence, politics, and law enforcement in America. In 2020, Lee launched The Race Report, a special MSNBC series that explored the intersection between race and politics in the election season. He also debuted Into America, the new podcast, elevating the voices of voters and demonstrating how policy impacts the day-to-day lives of Americans. Lee was also among the contributors to the New York Times Magazine's 1619 Project, which earned a 2020 George Polk Award for its exploration of the role of slavery in America and its enduring effects in contemporary American society. Hello, Trymaine. Thank you so much for joining the Blackest Questions.
Dr. Greer, thank you for having me. I'm a little nervous. I heard the run up.
Don't be nervous. Don't be nervous. As I tell everyone, this is, in my mind, Black history is American history. So this is just a time for us to have fun. Our listeners get to learn a little bit more about you. Pulitzer-Prize winning journalist, I might add. You were part of a team that covered Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans for the New Orleans Times-Picayune. How did you get involved in journalism? Is this something that was always in your blood, or did you kind of stumble upon it?
I think early on, like when I was just a kid, I knew I loved storytelling and I loved writing and I loved reading poetry. And I started winning awards when I was like a kid, like in grade school, I was writing essays and winning awards. So I think I also liked the little hand claps, like the little applause, like, oh, that felt good. Like y'all like this? I could do this. And so early on, I knew I could write and I enjoyed doing it. And it wasn't until maybe in high school, I was playing sports, but I was also writing for the yearbook staff. I was like, I want to get paid to do this one day. And it took me a long time to get to that point. But it all kind of came together. And once I realized that I wasn't going to be Richard Wright necessarily, and I was going to be, at least initially, kind of a hardcore street reporter, covering police and crime and capturing our stories, our life and our death in that kind of way. I think I was like just locked in at that point.
Did you have an English teacher that was a mentor to you? Because I feel like I always bonded with my math teachers. I never bonded with my English teachers. And so now that I write for a living, I always struggle because, writing's hard for almost everyone. But I really wish I had bonded with an English teacher where I could call them up and get advice. Did you ever have one of those teachers, or were you just kind of, on your own and the words just kind of came to you from wherever?
I didn't have, that kind of mentor English teacher, but my English teacher was one of my football coaches, and Coach Bueller. Oh. And I can remember doing stories and essays, and he'd have me come into other classes to read my stuff. And he was always just very supportive. Again, certainly I had a relationship with him because I saw him literally every single day, after school, during school, throughout school. But he was an early supporter and believer in my writing. And I think that, did help me because he exposed me. Again, he would literally pull me into other classes and be like, Trymaine, read the thing. And I would read it in front of the class, and it would be it would just be dope that I was doing it, because also I don't think people realized that I was about that life, because I was playing around with everybody and we hanging out and we kicking it. And I don't think, that's the one thing when I think back to high school, now, you want to stunt a little bit oh, I know that. Back then, it was kind of keeping it cool a little bit. If somebody asked me for some help, I do a little help on the side. I like to write the poetry, and some people knew, but it was dope to step outside of myself a little bit and present that side of myself to people.
Do you have a favorite writer or poet that you still sort of, when you need a little inspiration, you just open up the book and kind of breeze through?
It'd be, obviously this is, it's Langston Hughes, it's Amiri Baraka, it's Richard Wright. Richard Wright especially, I think, the original American Hunger right? This idea of this burning thing inside of us. And we're responding to all the stimuli in the world and the systems around us. And we're responding and we're fighting. And there's anger and there's violence and there's actual hunger. I think that has informed the way I want to tell these stories about, again, Black life and death in America in a certain way, that there is always a response to things happening around us, but we also have agency in this, and all the responses are valid, and we're still just trying to, find our footing and push. And I think, definitely Richard Wright, early on especially.
I stumbled upon Richard Wright's Rite of Passage, and I used to live on the Upper West Side near Columbia, and that book deals with Morningside Park, and, some young boys who unfortunately have an unfortunate incident in the park. And you can tell the entrances and the exits where they're running in and out of the park. And I just remember reading that book. I stumbled upon it, buying it from a used bookstore, but just going in and out of the sections that Richard Wright talks about. And I was like, this book isn't often talked about. I didn't read it in school. I'd never heard of it from any of my teachers or professors. But I think it's like one of the most beautifully written stories about kind of Black urban youth, if you will.
No, there's something so potent, and this is kind of obvious for people who are familiar with Richard Wright's work, but there's something so potent about it that cuts right to the core of the experience, right? We talk about the two-ness and all that stuff, but that's central, and not that it always has to be framed in the violence of it all, but there's something in the violence of it all and the projection of the violence. And not to be Frantz Fanonish about it, but lashing out at, each other, because the colonizer, you can't do that. Right. And so all that bound together and understand, especially Black boy, it's like, I kind of feel I understand that in a very kind of core connected kind of way.
Are you ready, my dear friend, to play the Blackest Question?
I guess if you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. So I guess I'm ready. Come in,
I love that.
Coming in ready.
Okay, let's come in hot. Question number 1. This civil rights attorney was known as Mr. Civil Rights, and he became the first Black U.S. Supreme Court justice. Who was he?
Thurgood Marshall?
Yes, Thurgood Marshall. I told you, we start off smooth and then it gets a little more difficult. Okay. So for our listeners out there, Thurgood Marshall was one of the architects of the civil rights movement, a passionately progressive attorney who helped end school segregation. He attended a segregated high school in Baltimore, my favorite city, and Lincoln University, historically Black university near Oxford, Pennsylvania. And his first choice for law school was actually the University of Maryland School of Law, but they didn't admit Black students, so he attended Howard University School of Law instead, an HBCU in Washington, D.C., and he graduated first in his class in 1933. And in 1934, he joined the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, known as the NAACP, as its first special counsel with a mission to help end educational discrimination in the United States. So over the years, Thurgood Marshall became the face of the civil rights litigation. He argued 32 cases before the Supreme Court. He won 29 of them, and he participated in hundreds of other cases in lower courts nationwide. And in the process, he traveled between 50,000 and 75,000 miles a year. I know you travel a lot, but Thurgood Marshall might have you beat. So he was crisscrossing the nation to oversee as many as 450 cases at a time. So in the early 1950s, he served as the lead attorney in what turned out to be the landmark civil rights lawsuit in the era, Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka. And in May 1954, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that the 14th Amendment, which provides all U.S. citizens equal protection under the law, prohibits segregating public schools by race, because segregated schools are inherently unequal. And so, even though states dragged their feet to implement the ruling, it set a national precedent and helped spark much of the civil rights movement. So that is Thurgood Marshall, our very first Black Supreme Court justice. So I know that you've been traveling all over, but especially in the South, doing some really great reporting on HBCUs. Can you give us a little preview as to what you're doing and why?
Yeah, so we have this series, this tour called Into America, The Power of the Black Vote, where we wanted to go across the country and engage with some of our best and brightest young minds about issues that matter to them. So we've traveled from Texas Southern University, North Carolina Central University, FAMU. Where else are we going? Jackson State University. And I think that's the... I feel like there's that commercial where the rapper's on stage, he's like, "Thank you, Cincinnati." And they start booing. It's like, "It's Pittsburgh." And I'm like,
right.
I know I'm somewhere. But so at each location, we're engaging with a different issue, right? So in Texas Southern University, we talked about the battle over CRT and who are the gatekeepers of the truth, right? And whose history matters. At North Carolina Central University, we're talking about the issue of student loan debt, right? At FAMU, a great environmental science program that nobody knows about. Like, these young people may very well save us and the world at the same time, in vulnerable communities with kind of innovative research into sea life and sea water and all kind of great stuff. And Jackson State University, these young people here have the honor and privilege of walking in mighty big footsteps, right? And standing on giant shoulders. Issues like reproductive rights, but also the infrastructure and the racialization around the weaponizing of access to water, right? And so talking to these young people, I'm in once like inspired, and I'm kind of like in awe. Like, they're 18, 19-year-old, and they're just about it. Like, we were about it, but they have a full grasp of all the systems at play here, where I think at 18, 19, I kind of understood, right? And through lived experience and through reading, but these kids are activating in a way that I think is just so important. So we wanted to go across the country and do just that, right? So we have this big town hall special at Texas Southern. We have this whole podcast series, doing TV around it. It's really an amazing endeavor, right? Just to be able to crisscross the South and engage at these schools. But it's a reminder that we might be okay. I think. Maybe.
Well, okay, we're going to take a quick commercial break, but I'm here with Trymaine Lee playing the Blackest Questions, and you are 1 for 1, brother.
On a roll. Let's go.
All right. And we're back playing the Blackest Questions with Trymaine Lee. All right. Are you ready for question number 2?
I think so.
I'm going to remind you, the questions get a little harder, but don't forget, Black history is American history, and the goal is not to get everything right. It's just for us to learn together on an intellectual journey. So, question number 2. CNBC recently highlighted this 24-year-old Canada-based creative who recently sold over $300,000 in NFTs. Who is she?
I have no idea. Wait. Let me think about this. 24 years old. Canada. NFTs. I don't even know what an NFT is, but I don't know. I know what an NFT is. I do not know who this person is.
Okay, it's Lana Danina. And so Lana Danina is based in Montreal, Canada, and started selling NFTs of paintings she created one by one, but later began to list entire collections. So the Mona Lana collection includes 500 unique portraits of women created by Lana Danina, and each portrait was generated by code with 112 different traits. And so since February 2021, Lana Danina has earned over $300,000 from selling her art as NFTs, or non-fungible tokens, on various platforms. And unlike traditional markets for art, NFTs and Web3 allows artists to create their own galleries and set their own prices online. And so artists can also earn royalties on secondary sales of their work with NFTs. And Danina herself earns 10%. So once the Mona Lana collection passes 100 Ether in volume traded, Danina plans to give a percentage of sales to Cyberbot, a creator DAO collective that supports African artists and donates to women's shelters in Canada. So, Trymaine, I don't know much about NFTs. I definitely don't know much about the NFT art world, but I was so fascinated by this idea of young people and creativity and technology and the arts movement. I know you've been on these HBCU campuses and spent a lot of time with young people. We've also had lots of conversations about art and Black art and the importance of surrounding ourselves with Black art, just because the world outside of us is just unwelcoming at times. And so when you think about art, who sort of sets your heart ablaze in a great way? Like, you know, when you think about Black artists, who brings a smile to your face and sort of a glisten in your eye?
Wow, glisten, a flutter. First of all, big shout to Lana. That's dope and beautiful. And like, that's just amazing, right? You know, I think, you know, at Jacob Lawrence, like one of my favorite periods in history is the Great Migration, and how the mass movement of us reshaped America in our politics, our cuisine, our music, and our art. And few artists to me have documented, a child of the migration, have documented so beautifully, like, the everyday nature of life, right? The heroes among us who are going to work and literally building cities or studying in the Schomburg, right? Or our historical figures, Toussaint Louverture and right, Harriet Tubman. His work just kind of grounds me in this experience, this American experience. When I see that, I'm just like, I feel like I recognize myself in that work. And then there's like a Gordon Parks on the flip side of art, right? As a photographer, I think a Gordon Parks captures a similar kind of everyday common man, the extraordinary folks like the Muhammad Ali's of the world and all the archetypes, but also everyday Black Americans in ways that really reflect and reveal our beauty that we all know is there. And I don't think you need to do it in seeking the white man's approval. I don't think he ever did, right? And he chose we call it his weapon of choice was his camera, Gordon Parks. But I think Jacob Lawrence I try to get into a little Romare Bearden because sometimes my eyes I'm trying to like understand what I'm seeing, which I kind of do.
Yeah. The collage can be really intense for some people.
It can because I want to, but it's a little tough.
Well, I love Jacob Lawrence. He's definitely one of my favorites. He and William Johnson. But what I really loved, I had the opportunity to see that entire migration series a few years ago when it came through New York.
I'm jealous.
It was I believe it was 60 panels that they, got from all the different museums and collectors. And what I thought was so fascinating, not just what you said about, the mass movement of Black bodies, especially going from the South to the North because of jobs and industry. And he's got that famous painting where it's like Chicago, St. Louis, Pittsburgh. You think about August Wilson and you think about Detroit and, all the great Black people who come out of Chicago, but also he's got some that really document this kind of fleeing domestic terrorism of the South as well. It's not just about jobs in the North. It's about what's going on in the South and how people are taking these midnight trains to escape white supremacy and the violence that is in the South. I just think that, that juxtaposed with a Gordon Parks, as you said, his Life magazine photos that are, and shout out to Andre Wagner, who I call like the modern day Gordon Parks, young cat. He did the most famous for the Queen and Slim poster, but shoots for the New York Times and was the Gordon Parks Fellow. But, documenting us just doing the mundane, just eating fast food or waiting at the bus stop to go to work, or just doing work, at a shop. I just think that those pieces of art, as you said, are these foundations of reminders of who we are.
This radical notion of just existing and being and breathing and confidence in your own skin. But also, Jacob Lawrence, and I forgot the title of this series, but it was like American history generally, right? So you had Washington over to Delaware, you had different aspects of it. And sometimes having a Black reflection of just history period and including us in it. Because we know we've been marginalized and sidelined and almost erased, and they're still doing it today, erasing our existence and our contributions to this place. But for him to also tell our story, but tell the American story, which is full, right? It's us, it's them. The way I think our history is often described, what's Black history, like we're here by ourselves, like in a silo, just doing Black people stuff, as opposed to we are bouncing off and moving around and conflating with and intertwined with white folks and Native American people and all the people of this country who were ground up for the benefit of some, equally as important.
Well, that's what I always say. Like this podcast, it's like, this isn't just for Black people to learn about, Black people past and present. It's for everyone. I mean, I always say it's like white people should be enraged that they didn't learn about this stuff in school. They should be angry. A lot of us learned about it at home. Granted, our parents couldn't cover everything that wasn't covered in school, but I feel like, non-Black people should feel like their education system has failed them by not knowing these things. Time for a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Blackest Questions. Now, you said something about, this contribution and to making sure that our history isn't erased. How is it that you got tied into the 1619 Project? Because your contribution is a beautiful reflection. So how did that come to be?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. The home in Nicole Hannah-Jones, the brilliant, queen mother of the project. We've been friends for a long time. She's a force. She truly is a force.
She's a real one, as they say.
Oh, and she's been a real one before she became Nicole Hannah-Jones 1619. And so we've been friends for a long time. And she came to me. We were actually having a conversation about 1619 approaching, and she's like, "Well, I actually got this thing we're doing. I would love for you to be a part of it." And I had an idea of something I wanted to do. And I had other stuff, and I was like, "I don't know, Nicole." And she's like, "You're going to want to do this." And this is before she knew what it would become. And Nicole's the kind of person, when she says something, like the way she said, I was like, she's basically telling me that I have to do it. So it's like, somebody says, you've been voluntold. I didn't volunteer. I was voluntold. And so, but the way she said it for us, she was like, "Trust me, you're going to want to do this. And it's important. I want to have your voice in this. And it's important." She was, gathering a collection of writers who she saw in a certain vein and wanted not mushy mouth, mealy mouth, politicized, none of that. She's like, I want real Black writers to write these real Black stories about the founding of America and how, all the ways that we've been intertwined with this. And so she told me to do it. And I said, yes, ma'am, I will do it. And it was honestly one of the more rewarding things in my career. And I feel like I've done a lot. I've always tried to shape my career in a way that is of like, I'm trying to like leave something when aliens come back, they understand how we live in America. Yeah. Right. The tapestry in a very, I've tried to do it in a way it's like, say not Jacob Lawrence, but like every day through crime and violence and politics and education and aspiration, all those things. But to be tapped by Nicole, to write a chapter in this book, knowing that this was going to have a transformative, not knowing fully, but at some point realizing what we were doing here, and we have this transformational kind of thing happening in America, and have everyone from the president and the Congress either hating it or applauding it, and forcing people to grapple with this America that we've been told that never really existed, the mythology surrounding what we believe this place to be. It's just an honor and a gift. And it's just, it's amazing that how the legs that the book has had, like it's still moving.
It still has legs. And I just, before we go to break, what I love about your writing is it always feels like it's in service to Black people.
Thank you.
Like you are writing not to win awards, of which you have many, people can Google you, but you're writing because you love Black people and you are writing to make sure that our stories are told. And so I think that's what comes off of the page, not just from the 1619 Project, but for so many of your other projects that I've read, that you've been acknowledged for, but it seems to be of service to Black people, which I think is the through line to all of your projects.
So when I hear that though, that my work is in service, and that's everything to me. And what's interesting is when people come up to me, and it's never white people. I've had like 2 white people come up to me and say, "Hey, Trymaine, whatever." They've written to me an email, whatever. But when Black people come up to me and say, "Hey, man, thank you," or "keep up the good work," or whatever it is, that is everything. Especially when it's like, look like my grandmother, look like my aunt, my uncle, and it's like my people that see me and appreciate that. That is the entire reward. Because then when they like the pride, feeling our people with pride, that they can look at me and say, "Yeah, that's us." That is absolutely
there's nothing better than that.
Nothing, not an award. Because yes, thank you. Yeah, I want those too, and I like the check, and I like to yes, please. But honestly, when I started the Philadelphia Tribune, the Black press, it was in service of us and telling our stories, and that love from the church folks when you go to do the story, and love from the neighborhood, and they know you're going to do it the right way. That you're not going to do any funny business, or you're not going to try to be telling a story through others' eyes, right? It's us, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because some of these stories are ugly. Right. But that it matters that I'm doing it, so yes, thank you very much.
Wow. Okay, let's take a quick break. I'm here with Trymaine Lee on the Blackest Questions. All right, we are back. I'm here with Trymaine Lee and the Blackest Questions. We're doing all right. You're, 1 out of 2. You ready for question number 3?
I am. I feel like 2 was like a little bit of a tricky one. It's Canadian, but I'm here. I'm ready. I'm here.
Okay, question number 3. Known as the superhero of filmmaking and considered a true pioneer of the film industry, he was the most successful African-American director of the first half of the 20th century. Who was he?
Michaud. Yes.
Oscar Michaud. So between 1919 and 1948, he wrote, produced, directed, and distributed more than 45 films for African-American audiences who watched these race, which means all Black films, in the 700 theaters that were part of the ghetto circuit, as it was called. So it's been 90 years since he became the first Black filmmaker to produce a sound feature film with The Exile, and it's been 70 years since his death. And still, Michaud's impact hasn't been fully measured or recognized by Hollywood in a lot of ways. So he's the child of formerly enslaved people, and as America's preeminent Black filmmaker for almost 3 decades, Michaud started the Michaud Film Corporation and made it over 40 films, often as a writer, director, and producer. And like Alfred Hitchcock, he often cameoed in his own work. And so he financed those movies any way he could, including, incredibly, selling stock in his company to white farmers in South Dakota. And in 1986, the Directors Guild of America honored Michaud with a Lifetime Achievement Award. And in 2010, the U.S. Postal Service issued a Michaud commemorative stamp. In 2019, Michaud's masterpiece, Body and Soul, was selected by the Library of Congress for preservation in the National Film Registry for being culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. Are you familiar? Have you seen any of Oscar Michaud's films, or do you just know about his work through some of your research and writing elsewhere?
Yeah, I'm not super duper familiar with the films. I've seen pieces of the films. I don't think I've ever seen a full Oscar Michaud film. But the one thing I've always loved about what I have seen of Oscar Michaud's work is similar to if you ever see the old photo album from the 1930s or the 20s, and maybe some middle class family in Minnesota or somebody in Harlem. It captures a different side of Black life back then. It wasn't all just sharecropping and right. It just wasn't that. And so in those period films, those race films, where it's they're at the orchestra's playing, and the black folks is dancing, and there's some sort of romance thing, and then something happened, they got to flee, and they're in the car. It just gives a different, probably a truer version. Obviously, the industry was still the industry, right? And he was still trying to forge a way where there was no way. So I'm sure he had to acquiesce to some forces about how he present black folks. But I love that it shows a fuller picture of Black life in America during a pretty specific kind of time, right? The 30s, the 40s.
We're full people, right? It's not all doom and gloom and sadness and downtrodden long faces. It's we've actually always had joy and laughter and dancing and family and relationships and drama and shenanigans. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the beauty of these films. Do you have a favorite Black director?
Oh, it's Spike Lee. Spike Lee is really? Spike Lee is really absolutely my favorite. I mean, when I watched Do the Right Thing, and I must have been, I don't know, 12, 13, 14, whatever age I was. It just spoke to me because it hit all the things in my brain. It was like the Jordans and Public Enemy and Fighting the System and the cultural, the visual language that he used.
What I tell you about that noise? What I tell you about them pictures?
Those long, beautiful scenes where the guys were out on the block and the interaction between him and the son and Sal. We all know it's Sal. When you're young, you work for some Sals who you kind of got a good relationship with them, but they're kind of racist. Growing up in South Jersey with regular working class white people, not white people with money, they're friends of yours. You know their dad's racist. The mom's racist, but we're all in the same community. We're friends, and you're doing that kind of dance around those dynamics. And so Do the Right Thing. And then Malcolm X, personal hero of mine, Malcolm X, the epic work that was. I think that he did it when no one believed in him, and he did it in a time. Think about coming out of the 80s into the 90s, where it was you can't be mad and angry black man, all these things, right? Black folks got access to industry and some money, so now you have to kind of assimilate as much as possible. And he's confronting that head on. Yeah.
I mean, I gotta say, my favorite Spike film is School Days.
Yeah.
I'm a sucker for musicals, and I'm a big Rodgers and Hammerstein fan.
Whether you're a dog or you're fair, so you can go on and swear, see if I can, good and bad.
But to see, first of all, Tisha Campbell, shut up. Samuel Jackson, Lawrence Fishburne. I mean, just Giancarlo Esposito. I mean, the cast alone say nothing of Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis. The whole cast, but the fact that you have a musical at an HBCU,
right?
And the whole fraternity
colorism,
scene, my mom's an AKA, my dad's a Q. Yeah, exactly. And hair. I mean, all the things that I think as a young Black girl we talked about in my family. My mom's more brown skinned than my sister and myself. This idea of what is good hair, and that rejecting that construct, but also, my dad's a Q. So many of my cousins are my Q cousins. So just seeing this frat scene, obviously I wasn't around when my dad was pledging other people, but this idea of fraternity and brotherhood and why people would want that even was just, it's still, that one, School Days is light years ahead of all the other Spike films for me. And obviously Do the Right Thing and Malcolm X are way up there.
I think about Samuel Jackson. You think about the scene where they're at the restaurant, and it's what it means to be middle class and Black or educated and Black, juxtaposing what it means to be real, regular Black folks, right? And that dynamic. I think he exposed a lot of things there. That's a conversation for us. And that's another one that we will understand those dynamics because we're all bouncing around somewhere in between those forms of Blackness.
School Days is almost 30 years old, I think.
Gotta be more. Is it more?
I need to look at my I mean, listen, we're getting old. We're trying to run.
Some of us are getting old. Some of us getting better. I don't know.
Oh, that's right.
I just had a birthday.
Right. That's right. Like,
listen.
Like a fine wine. That's right. Virgo season's over, sir.
That's all year round. What you?
That's right. That's right. No, it's only going to get better. I mean, that's the beauty of, sort of acknowledging we get to be this age. We get to have graying hair. It's a blessing.
This idea of aging while black, I've been having this thought and this conversation. What it means to be an old black man in America. I cannot wait. Let me get all the grades. Let me be a 90-year-old cantankerous, y'all better stop playing with me, black man, because black men don't make it this far, right? We don't. We often don't. Our life expectancy is years and years below white men, certainly, and black women, of course. And the attacks on all fronts. And so I rejoice in getting older, and the more gray, it's starting to get the whole thing down here starting to get gray. But it's like, guess what? I earned them. And thank you. Cause
every gray.
What's the opposite?
Every gray tells a story.
And what's the opposite of getting older? Right? Like, we trying to be here.
Right.
So now we can go to a break.
We are here. That's right. Right. We're going to take a quick break. I'm here with Trymaine Lee. Okay, and we're back. We're playing the Blackest Questions, and we are going to zoom through question number 4. Are you ready, Mr. Lee?
I think so.
Okay. A block in Harlem, New York, where a groundbreaking tennis star grew up, will now bear her name. Who was she?
I want to say Althea Gibson.
You are correct. Killing the game
There we
today.
go.
So Althea Gibson was born to sharecroppers in Clarendon County, South Carolina in 1927. When the cotton market collapsed in the latter part of the decade, Gibson and her family relocated to Harlem, and that's where she first picked up a tennis racket. In 1956, she would become the first African-American to win a Grand Slam event taking place in the French Championship. The following year, she became the first African-American to win England's famed Wimbledon tournament. And by the time she retired from amateur tennis in 1959, Gibson had claimed 11 Grand Slam titles and was the first black woman to be ranked #1 player in the world. And so I always think about Althea Gibson because obviously there's so much conversation about Serena as the GOAT as she is, and her recent retirement, or as she says, evolving from tennis as a sport. And I know that, we've talked, you're a big Serena fan, but I always want to remember Althea Gibson because without Althea, there is no Venus and Serena, and there's definitely no Coco or Naomi Osaka and all the new generations of amazing black tennis players that we see today. Do you follow tennis at all? I mean, you mentioned that you played football in high school. Do you ever pick up a racket?
I never picked up a racket. And it's interesting you bring up Serena. That's the reason I watch tennis now. And I just started watching the men just because I just started. But so I'm like locked into women's tennis and Williams sisters tennis in particular. But I love, the framing here of like Althea swung so Serena could dominate, right? Because think about how tough it was for Serena and Venus to move through that very white, wealthy world where there were still some black folks at the country club. A few. Althea Gibson, wasn't nobody at the country club. Wasn't nobody there. Wasn't nobody there to support you. And most of them really honestly didn't want you there. Like really truly didn't want you there. And you're challenging policy and laws just to be able to engage in the sport that you love. And so while I've never played tennis, I've hit a ball a few times and something, my mechanics ain't right. I need a little more time. I'm sure I'd be good at it if I had some time. But yeah, they brought me into tennis. And that's the only reason I watch tennis is because the Williams sisters.
So I've played tennis for a very long time. I'm not good. I always tell people I play ugly tennis. So in my head, I look like Althea.
Yeah.
On the court, I don't.
Right. And
so it's interesting because growing up, I always knew about Althea Gibson. I don't know if I had a book. I don't know if my parents told me about her. So when the Williams sisters came on the scene, for me, it was just like, oh, they're an extension of this woman that I had heard about, who's this amazing tennis player. And obviously Arthur Ashe was another person that I'd heard about as a young kid. But whenever I pick up a racket, I always feel like the spirit of Althea Gibson is with me. But unfortunately, the spirit doesn't help me get the ball across the net.
Yeah.
It just helps me have the confidence to keep going back to the court.
I think there was, with Althea Gibson and those people that we learned about when we were young, there was this kind of dignity and pride, and they were so classy, representing like you're a credit to your race kind of thing. And then when like Serena and Venus, it was like bold. Like we got our beads, and we come in and we don't want to be part of this. We're from Compton. We have to dominate. And that strength and power was a juxtaposition. But again, they're not even bookends, but they're different way stations in the journey of blackness, right? We're classy and we're upright and we're also like, we're not here to play. And I love that kind of trajectory from Althea to the Williams sisters.
Yeah, well, I think, before we go to break, I think this is the through line of our conversation today. It's like there's so many different ways to be Black and to celebrate Blackness. And that's the beauty of who we are in this country and how we've created our identity out of, whatever was given and what we decided to take. We've created some of the most beautiful, diverse, dynamic ways of representing ourselves. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break. I'm with Trymaine Lee. You're listening to The Blackest Questions. And we're back. I'm here with my dear friend Trymaine Lee, and we're about to hit up question number 5. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
The emergence of this all-female military regiment was the result of their male population facing high casualties in the increasingly frequent violence and warfare with neighboring West African states. Who were they?
I know this too. The homie, what was there? Is it the homie? But I don't remember what the sisters were called. The fight.
I think we're going to give you the point. It's the Dahomey Warriors.
There we go. I thought they had
So
a name.
you are correct. We have the Dahomey Warriors, one of the few documented female armies in modern history. The Dahomey was an all-female military regiment of the Kingdom of Dahomey, which existed from the 1600s until 1904. And soldiers were recruited from free Dahomean women, but there were hundreds of soldiers who were also from foreign captives. And during their membership, they were not allowed to have children or be married. And the largest ethnic groups were found primarily in Benin, in the southern region, but they were also found in southwest Nigeria and Togo. And the total population is estimated to be about 3.5 million people when it was all said and done. And European colonizers considered the historical capital city of Dahomey as a major commercial center for the slave trade and part of the area they called the Slave Coast. Recently, there was a film that just came out called The Woman King, starring Viola Davis as the general of the Dahomey Warriors. It's been under quite a bit of a spotlight. Some people love it, and some people are saying that we should boycott it. Have you seen the film just yet, Trymaine?
I have not seen it. I've heard about the controversy. I understand the controversy. I've heard great things about Viola Davis' performance in the movie generally, and so I don't know how they address the elephant in the room. But it seems like it's a great opportunity to have a discussion about Africans taking part in the slave trade and what role. We know that Dahomey, where there's that one quote by the king who was like, our women sing lullabies about conquering our enemies and making them slaves. And I think it's a good reminder that, Europe created these boundaries, right? And made Congo the Congo and made Nigeria Nigeria. They weren't that before. They were different peoples in different regions of this country. This continent who were at odds, right? And white folks did fuel that by introducing the gun, right? The gun for slave cycle and all that stuff. So it's very complicated history. And I don't know how much they engage with all of that in the film, but it sounds like it's a great opportunity to build a conversation around it.
Yeah, I agree. I have yet to see it. I always like to support Black films. I try and go and see them on opening weekend just so they can get those numbers. But, the schedule's been the schedule. But I definitely do want to support just because, if you don't have the ticket sales, then they feel these stories don't need to be told. But just as you said, it's like it is a complex and complicated history that at least, if nothing else, will start a conversation about. Maybe someone will want to pick up a book to see what the reality was, because obviously we know that this is a fictional portrayal. But yes, it wasn't just everybody, on the continent of Africa being best friends and braiding hair and, sisterhood. It's like, no, folks are bellicose. That's what it is. That's the nature of human beings, sadly. And so it's a complicated history that, was complicated before the Europeans got there and definitely a lot more difficult and complicated once they left. Okay, so we're going to take a quick commercial break, and then we're going to come back and play Black Lightning. So we are back with my dear friend Trymaine Lee. And so, Trymaine, before we let you get out of here, we've got time for the Black bonus round. And this is a round where whatever comes to mind is the right answer. Okay? So This is just a way for our audience to get to know you a little bit better. Okay, you ready? These are just hot takes.
Okay.
Favorite city, Philly or New York?
Philly.
Swimming or fishing?
Swimming where? I think it depends. I love fishing, but if we in Turks and Caicos and that water is turquoise, I need to be swimming in that. But it's hard. I don't know. It depends where. I love fishing though.
Okay. Favorite fish to catch?
Oh, largemouth. Well, smallmouth bass has a lot of fight in them. They're small but mighty. But largemouth, they're predator fish, and so you have to angle to get them. They're not dumb either, so you got to get them. So I would say largemouth.
Okay. Hot take. Best stand-up comedian, Mike Epps or Cat Williams?
I would have to say Mike Epps. Cat Williams, there's a genius to Cat Williams. There's something really special about Cat Williams. But I would have to go with Mike Epps. Everyman kind of thing. Yeah, I like Mike. That's hard, actually. That's hard. Because Cat Williams I think he is a genius.
Okay.
I don't know.
Alarm clocks or natural rise?
A natural rise is always good.
Okay. Air Jordans or Yeezys?
Jordans. I don't even understand Yeezys. I don't understand them.
I mean, they look like space shuttle shoes. But
I don't understand them.
90s hip hop or 90s R&B soul?
It's not even a fair question. I mean, am I on an island and I can only listen to one, or
Yes.
I'm on an island I can only listen to one? I would probably have to say I'm going to say 90s R&B because I think I don't know if I could say, I don't know, 90s R&B.
Okay. If you had to choose Allen Iverson or Isaiah Thomas?
90s hip-hop.
You're changing? Okay, 90s hip hop.
Rewind.
If you had to choose Allen Iverson or Isaiah Thomas?
Iverson, all day to answer.
Okay. And do you prefer dining in or taking out?
Dining in or taking out? I would probably, I guess it depends. I mean, I like a good dining out situation. I like it's almost like calling out of work, calling into work, so I think I'm using these things differently. I'd like sitting in a restaurant at times, but there's nothing like kicking back at the crib, get some food, watch a movie, play some music, have a little taste, a little something. I'm an adult beverage if you're of age. One or two little adult
only
beverages.
if you're of age.
Only.
Right.
Children.
Only. Right. This is a responsible podcast, Trymaine. Listen, I want to thank you so much for joining us on the Blackest Questions. I hope you learned a little something today. I know our listeners loved hearing about your thoughts on art and writing and literature, and promise us you'll come back and give us a little bit more about what you're up to.
Dr. Greer, this has been an amazing, wonderful, fun experience. I was a little nervous at first because I didn't want to disappoint my people, but I feel like we gave something to the people, and I got something myself. So thank you so much for having me.
You are always of service to the people. Let's take a quick commercial break, and we'll be back in a moment. And we're back. Thank you so much for listening to The Blackest Questions. The show is produced by Akila Shedrick, Jesse Vargas, and Sasha Armstrong. If you like what you heard, please download the Grio app to listen and watch many more great shows and share it with everyone you know.